Okay, guys, we're going to be taking a look at the Cold War here, and we are going to focus basically on slides 110 to 115 today. So, we left off, we had started talking about this, but I just wanted to reiterate it because this is really important. We get to the arms race, and this is where, again, the US and the Soviets have both developed the hydrogen bomb by 1952. But when we start focusing on this, what we really get into is the space race, because the idea is if you can launch a rocket into outer space with a nuclear weapon on it, you're going to have total superiority. And the Soviets actually are the first guys to do this. In 1957, they're going to launch Sputnik, which you can see in the photograph here. It's roughly about the size of a basketball with about 6 feet to maybe 9 feet length antennas. And it just really relayed radio stuff. So it wasn't really super deadly, but again, that concept of it is really kind of all encompassing. And this is really what was totally scary at this particular time. Now, as the arms race continues, by 1959, both countries will start to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, or what are known as ICBMs. In other words, they launch these things from missile silos, and they can pretty much hit anywhere within the Earth in about an hour to 2 hours, depending on what areas and what zones they're going in. And what we'll see is that the United States will eventually develop what are called MIRVs, multiple interstellar reentry vehicles. And these things will have nose cones that will split open and contain anywhere from 5 to 15 25 megaton bombs. The Russians will end up creating the Tsar bomb, which is a 250 megaton bomb. The policy of both ends up becoming known as MAD, mutually assured destruction. The idea is if you blow up me or any of my allies, we will freaking nuke you until there's nothing left. And so what happens is it kept being a buildup, and it's like two bullies squaring off, and the bully gets a couple of friends, and then the other bully gets a couple of friends, and then that other bully, he gets more of his buddies to show up. And the idea is to try and kind of like scare the crap out of the other dudes so that nobody pulls the trigger first. Okay. You can also see that Japan will become the first country in 1954 to launch an anti-nuclear weapons movement. And again, Japan was actually under the control essentially of the United States with the MacArthur Constitution, and they weren't allowed to build a military backup. As a result of that, they didn't have any nukes, and they were terrified that the Soviet Union was right next to them, along with China. Now, what will happen is we end up having the formation of what became known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, this is similar back to the League of Nations with the whole collective security idea. In other words, you attack one, you attack all. Now, what happened was, though, this was voluntary, and again, it was mainly because the nuclear weapons had changed the game. When the North Atlantic Treaty is created in April of 1949, what they told the communists was any aggressive threat to a member nation would actually be met with an armed response. The Soviets, in turn, actually did this as well with what became known as the Warsaw Pact in 1955. And again, you can see surrounding nations will also, again, kind of pick up and take heart of this as well. So if you mess with one, you mess with all, and again, it could lead to a nuclear response. Now, as a result of this, we also see other anti-Soviet treaties actually begin to appear. Now, these aren't necessarily related to actual nuclear stuff, but we end up seeing these groups actually end up forming. We get SEATO, which is the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and we also get Great Britain will help the Middle East and Southern Asian countries to form what they call the Central Treaty Organization. The idea was to keep the Soviets, again, from expanding. In other words, we're falling back to the idea of Truman's containment policy. In other words, we can keep communism out of those countries, even though we may not necessarily be able to destroy it. Now, our final grouping here, we get a couple of guys who are going to change the way that they do this. Two of these are going to be what are known as non-alignment movements, and we're going to look at a third guy a little bit later. The non-alignment movement literally meant that these guys pit the superpowers against each other. You have on the left was Tito's Yugoslavia, okay, and the other one is Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the Prime Minister of India. Both of these guys will actually play and barter with the United States. And the idea is, and the Soviet Union, and the idea is they never fully commit, but they constantly promise and they pretend like they're interested. So think of this almost as like a dating situation. You have a really pretty girl and she's interested in two guys, but she doesn't know which guy she likes the most. So she keeps playing on their affections. Okay. And really, she doesn't pick either one. She just takes the benefit of having two different boys competing for her. This is essentially what the non-alignment guys ended up doing. All right, some of the other guys that actually did this as well, we get Nkrumah of Guyana. He will do this as well. Nasser's Egypt, who we'll actually take a look at a little bit later as well, because he's going to be very important in what becomes known as the Pan-Arab movement. And finally, we get Sukarno, who is actually the leader of Indonesia. He is also going to do this same type of concept of playing sides against one another.